Hi, I'm Rahel Philipose, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. In this episode, we talk about 33 academics demanding to be dissociated from the NCERT textbooks that they originally helped to develop. We also talk about the El Nino phenomenon and how it affects the monsoon. But first, we talk about Uttarakhand. Yesterday, we talked about the communal tensions simmering in Maharashtra, how social media posts and religious processions have led to at least 12 cases of unrest in the last 3 months. But today, we take a look at such tensions unfolding in a town of Uttarakhand, where Hindu right-wing groups have organized rallies, pasted posters on shops owned by Muslims, and threatened them with consequences if they do not leave the town. And all of this because of an alleged case of elopement. When we spoke to the Indian Express's Avaneesh Mishra, he told us about it.
This case is of May 26, and according to the allegations made, a Muslim guy, Ubaid Khan, and a Hindu guy, Jitendra Saini, they kind of tried to abduct a minor Hindu girl. And after that, some locals claimed that they caught these people red-handed. And after that, they informed some local right-wing organizations and also the local police. After that incident, an FIR was registered against these two people under the sections of POCSO and IPC Act.
Now, this happened in a town called Purola, which is about 140 kilometers away from Dehradun. It's a place where Avaneesh says Muslims are in the minority.
So the Purola town is around 20 kilometers from Navgaon, which falls on the Char Dham Yatra route to Yamunotri Dham. And this town is on the way to Har Ki Doon, which is a major tourist destination in Uttarakhand. And if we talk about the population here, so most of the Muslim families living in Purola were not exactly residents of this place. They did not have their own houses, and most of them had rented shops or rented houses at this place. So what I have been told that there are around 200 shops in total in Purola area, and out of those shops, just around 35 to 40 shops belong to Muslims. And even in that, just around 5 to 6 families have their own houses and shops in this particular area.
Now, after the alleged incident involving elopement and abduction, there was an uproar among the people of Purola who said that this was a case of love jihad. And here, it's important to note that the local police who are investigating the case informed Avaneesh that there was actually no love jihad angle to it.
Because the boys did not know the girl, and there was no such plan to meet, nothing was planned in this case, which is kind of a condition for what we can call a love jihad case. And the police officials involved with the investigation, they also told me that the girl said that she was trying to confirm some address with these people when these people were standing near a petrol pump. And after that, some conversation might have broke out between these people when the locals kind of caught them and suspected that this is probably a case of love jihad.
But despite what the girl and the police said, the uproar among the locals did not die down. And Avaneesh says that soon calls were made for Muslims to leave the town. A poster was also pasted outside the Muslim-run shops in the area, which asked them to leave Purola or else they would face consequences. And since that time, these shops have remained closed.
The term used in the poster was love jihadis, and it was mentioned that all the love jihadis need to leave this area before June 15. And if not, then they will have to face consequences. And these posters were pasted outside the shops owned by Muslims in this area. There also was an FIR registered against unidentified people because as of now, the police is not sure who are the people who did these things.
And he says that the posters, the calls to leave town and the subsequent rallies have left the Muslim community in Purola in a state of fear.
A lot of people involved with this movement are kind of saying that those people who are coming from outside, they are involved in illegal activities. they kind of take the business from the local people and they get prosperous while the locals do not get benefit from the business. And that is why there is a lot of agitation among the people. There are also allegations of love jihad, even though the police are denying that there is any love jihad angles in this particular case. There are also allegations of land jihad, which is not basically for Purola itself, but like at present, there is a big debate on the topic of land jihad across Uttarakhand. Even the chief minister has talked about this, and in the state, there is already a campaign running to free such places which are allegedly occupied by either outsides or people from a particular community or occupied by anyone. So because of this entire talk about love jihad and land jihad, there is this kind of hatred towards a particular community. And because of that hatred, a lot of statements are also coming from the right-wing organizations. And this notion of love jihad and land jihad was kind of in the center of it. And because of the fear which was created through rallies and slogans and the kind of things running on the social media, most of them who did not have their own houses and were kind of running their shops in rented places, they decided to leave this place.
In fact, he says that one of the people who left the town is a Muslim guy associated with the ruling BJP government in Uttarakhand.
And he was also a local office bearer of Uttarkashi unit of the BJP. And as of now, at least 12 such families have already left the area. But those Muslim families who have their houses and their own shops in the area, they are still in Purola, and their future is still, it's not decided. So they are waiting for a confirmation on when they can probably open their shops.
Now, besides this, there was also a Mahapanchayat that was scheduled to take place in the area yesterday. Organized by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad and the Bajrang Dal, the main aim behind it was to amplify the call that Muslims should leave the town. But Avneesh says that many civil society organizations spoke out against it and even wrote to the Supreme Court requesting that it should be stopped. And sensing the rising tension, the police imposed Section 144 in the area, and which is why the Mahapanchayat could not take place in the end.
A lot of people started to move towards Purola, but they were stopped at Navgaon. Around 70 to 80 people were stopped there by the police administration. And after that, a memorandum was submitted to the local SDM through the VHP and Bajrang Dal. So the Mahapanchayat did not take place, but the right-wing organizations are still saying that their demands of a proper verification system for the outsiders coming and other demands to stop the love jihad and land jihad, if these demands are not met, then a similar Mahapanchayat or a similar announcement will be made in the coming days when Section 144 is not imposed in the area.
Avneesh says that this incident in Purola is yet another example of the rising communal tensions in the state.
See, Uttarakhand has always been considered as a very peaceful state. And as far as I can remember, incidents like these, the communal tension and such incidents were not very common in Uttarakhand. But for the last few years, we keep hearing such kind of tension, all communal tension. We are seeing a lot of examples, and the most infamous case was the Haridwar Dharam Sansad, in which a lot of communal statements were given by several religious leaders. There were demands of a massacre of Muslims. There were demands of social and all kind of boycotts of the minority communities. And after that, even if we look at some of the recent incidents, then recently a BJP leader had to call off his daughter's wedding with a Muslim guy because there were a lot of oppose and uproar on the social media. So in the recent times, there has been this kind of tension, and there are several incidents where accusations of love jihad have been made in the state. So definitely things are changing in the state, and it will be the responsibility of the state government to make sure that the law and order situation remains in the state and the peace is also maintained. And even on Thursday, the High Court also said the same thing. They asked the state government to make sure that the law and order situation is maintained in the state, and they also refrained all the parties involved with the Parola case to not have any debate on this topic on the social media. So yeah, I mean, now it will be the responsibility of the state government, and we have to see how they will tackle this issue.
And next we talk about the NCERT, the autonomous organization under the Government of India, which is in charge of drafting school curriculum and school textbooks. After the NCERT this year made sweeping changes and deletions in school textbooks, last week renowned political scientists Suhas Palchikar and Yogendra Yadav, who were the chief advisors for the political science textbooks originally published in 2006, said that they now wanted to dissociate themselves from it. The two of them wrote to NCERT requesting that their names be dropped from the books. And now, less than a week later, a total of 33 academicians who were part of the Political Science Textbook Development Committee have also written to the council requesting a deletion of their names from the books. In this segment, we speak to the Indian Express's national education editor, Ritika Chopra, about it. So, Ritika, can you tell us what exactly have these academics requested from the NCERT and what stands out in their letter?
So this is a letter which was written on 14th of June. And what's surprising, honestly, is the number of academics who've come out and said that they don't want their names to be associated with these textbooks. These 33 academicians who've signed the letter are those who were consulted on political science textbooks, which were currently being used in schools right now. Of course, in a more rationalized format, but still these textbooks, which are currently being used in schools, were originally drafted in the years 2006, 2007. And that's when these 33 academicians, there are actually more, but these 33 were among professors and political scientists who were co-opted by the NCERT to help them draft these books. So it's not as if each one of them had given an input or had inputs to give for all chapters. There were, for instance, there would have been academicians who were associated with a particular chapter, but each one of them has their name mentioned or rather have been credited for their input. If it was regarding a certain chapter, then those details are mentioned in the preface of the textbooks as well. What they're demanding now is that since they're unhappy with the substantial changes that have been made to the original text of the book, they're saying that we no longer identify with these textbooks. In fact, this is not what we worked on in its current form. So there's no reason why our names should be actually associated with these textbooks.
And could you give some examples of the kind of deletions that have taken place in the textbooks this time?
So we had a very detailed 3-part series which lists out almost, as many changes as we could, because we also felt that these changes fit a certain pattern. And one pattern that we'd identified was that there were many changes pertaining to independent India's political history, let's call it that. These are recent political developments, and there were many changes made pertaining to that. One, of course, was the references to the 2002 Gujarat riots were removed. Another interesting one was, and right now, given I'm only mentioning the changes which have been made to the political science textbooks because that's what we're discussing right now. Yeah, so 2002 Gujarat riots, passages pertaining to the draconian effects of the emergency, effects on people, on institutions. There were massive deletions pertaining to protests and social movements. Again, that was also part of political science textbooks. These are just some of the deletions made, and including the recent one, which wasn't announced last year, but was kind of surreptitiously made in the reprinted textbooks, was the one pertaining to the events leading up to Mahatma Gandhi's assassination. Yeah, so these were the glaring ones that were made.
Right. And when we talk about the changes, the logic that the government has given is that they've made them to make the coursework lighter for the students. But when you look at the changes, of course, you see an inconsistency with that logic. But Suhas Palchikar and Yogendra Yadav were the first to say that they want their names removed. Could you talk about how the NCERT has responded to their request as well as the letter?
If I'm not wrong, I think their letter was released last Friday. And in less than 24 hours, the NCERT had issued a statement. There were no direct references to what they had said, but it was quite evident that the statement put out by NCERT was in response to the letter written by Yogendra Yadav and Suhas Pashikar, because it spoke about members of textbook development committee and whether they had the right to disassociate or not. I mean, those were the references made. There were oblique references, not sort of any direct reference to the letter, but it was quite evident what it was about. And in that, they said that, since the term of the textbook development committee, and mind you, all the 33 people who have disassociated were technically members of the textbook development committee for political science. So since that committee's term is over, once that happened, the rights of the textbook were sort of transferred, or it was NCERT which essentially owned the rights to those textbooks. And by virtue of that, it had the right to make any changes in future. So that was A, the defense, as far as the changes were concerned. And B, they said that, NCERT too said that in its statement, that since it is a collective effort and no single person can claim authorship to these textbooks, so there is no way that one or two people can try and sort of disassociate themselves from these textbooks. So rather the letter pretty much said that, the question of disassociation doesn't arise at all, or the withdrawal of association doesn't arise at all. And that was their basic response. They shot down the request, defended their right to make changes, and they said that we're just mentioning your names as part of record and to give you credit for the effort and work put in back then.
And Ritika, the fact that 33 academics have now come out and said that they want their names removed from these textbooks, how significant would you say that development is?
I think the numbers is what makes it significant. Of course, all of them are pretty renowned in their field. I mean, if you look at that list of 33, these are names that you would have heard of when they're pretty renowned in their sector. Many of them known internationally for their work. But I don't know if you've noticed, on and off, most letters sort of condemn. In the past also, there were historians who came together to condemn the changes, or rather disagree with the changes made in the NCERT textbooks. But this is significant because these are people who were associated with these textbooks originally, and they're now saying that you want to make those changes, feel free to go ahead, but we don't want anything that gives the impression that we were associated with the current changes. We don't want any such impression to go out, so which is why we want our names to be completely dropped from these textbooks. So it's the number. If I'm not wrong, I don't have the exact number of people who were taken on board to advise NCERT on these textbooks, but if I'm not wrong, this is more or less, with the exception of a few, this is more or less almost everybody that they had consulted. And 33 is a significant number. We still don't know whether NCERT would agree to this, but at this point, it seems like at least the advisors for political science textbooks are not relenting. One will wait to see if this spreads to other subjects, if people associated with history and sociology or English or other textbooks also come out and say that we don't want any association with these books.
And in the end, we talk about the El Nino phenomenon. On the 8th of June, the India Meteorological Department declared the onset of the monsoon in India. Now, like most climate experts have been predicting, the southwest monsoon arrived later than usual this year. In fact, apart from the years 2016 and 2019, this is the most that the monsoon's onset has been delayed. And a big reason behind this delay is a weather phenomenon known as El Nino. To find out more about this phenomenon and its impact on India, we speak to Anjali Marar, a science communicator at Raman Research Institute, Bengaluru, who also reports on climate change and the weather for the Indian Express. So to start with, Anjali, could you talk about the different weather phenomena that generally determine global climate?
So it was just a few days ago when the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, which declared the onset of El Nino, or the beginning of El Nino. So El Nino is basically the warmer phase of the Pacific Ocean, wherein the equatorial and central Pacific Ocean sea surface temperatures tend to be warmer than usual. So this is a warm phase. Then there is a neutral phase, wherein the sea surface temperatures are just close to the average or normal. And there's a third phase, which is called La Nina, wherein the sea surface temperatures are cooler than usual. So these are the three important phases of El Nino Southern Oscillation. It's called ENSO. Each of these influence the weather globally. We cannot say directly India, but it influences the weather globally. These are all global phenomena which happens in a cycle, and it can vary between 2 to 7 years. So between 2 to 7 years, we can have these neutral, warmer or cooler phases interplay.
Okay, and right now we are witnessing the El Nino phase. Could you talk about how this phenomenon in particular has become such a central part of conversations about the monsoon in India?
So in this particular year, 2023, when we have El Nino, it is usually associated with excess warming. And that is why if there is more warming, we can have more adverse climate events through the period when El Nino lasts. So why it has been spoken about much is because many of the past El Nino years, for example, 2002, 2004, 2009, 2015, the recent one in this century, had adverse effects, if I were to put it in that way. That is why El Nino is always seen as a threat or seen as to cast a negative influence on the weather. So in Indian context, for example, if I were to give some statistics here, in the last century, we've had about 18 years when there were droughts. And out of these 18, 13 were associated or were during El Nino years. So there may be no direct one-on-one relation with, a particular region or a particular weather, but El Nino can have a negative influence or can influence the weather in a negative manner. That is why there is so much of conversation. And in fact, El Nino this year was supposed to emerge only in August. But because of the other favorable conditions, the onset or the El Nino event began in May itself. So there has been a very fast development of this phenomenon in the Pacific Ocean.
So does that mean we're likely to receive less rainfall than normal this monsoon?
Right. So as the onset month is still going on and the monsoon has not reached all parts of India yet, June rainfall, that is what the IMD has predicted, will be below normal, which means that is also possibly because of the rainfall reaching late at certain areas in North India and other regions. Overall, the season, that is June to September, the 4-month-long season, the long period average rainfall for the country, for India as a whole, is expected to be normal. This despite there being an El Nino. So the reason that the IMD had stated was there are other favorable factors. So it's not just El Nino which influences the monsoon, but if there are counter positive phenomenon which can counter the El Nino effect, one of them being the Madden-Julian oscillation or the Indian Ocean dipole, if they are in their positive phases and they're able to counter the negative effect of or the influence of El Nino, then at the end of the season in September, the country should have received normal rainfall. That's the forecast.
Right. And Anjali, we live in a country where so many people are dependent to varying degrees on the monsoon for their sustenance and employment. So could you talk about some of the larger implications of this weather pattern, beyond the weather changes that it causes?
Correct. So what happens usually is during El Nino years, the rainfall, India being an agrarian economy, for us receiving normal rainfall is very crucial for our year-long activities for India to have a stable economy. So during El Nino years, it has been observed in many years that the rainfall is either below normal or it can be not up to the mark. And hence, if it does directly affect the agriculture, sowing, our agricultural output, what is received. This affects both the seasons, Kharif sowing as well as Rabi sowing. It directly then gets linked with our outputs from industry. All allied services also get affected. So basically this announcement or declaration of El Nino may not directly impact you or me as an individual, but it is for the governments and those in the policy to take note of this development and then keep a contingency plan or a plan B ready. In fact, the RBI governor just a few days ago mentioned that inflation or other things need to be factored in, keeping in mind that we have El Nino over the next few months coming over.
Right. And Anjali, is there a link between global warming and the El Nino phenomenon?
So when there is more heating, more than normal heating, then El Nino can tend to push the global warming effects, what we're already experiencing. So it may make the atmosphere, ocean, it may further warm from the present conditions. and warm oceans or warm atmosphere, which will mean that there will be more precipitation, that is more rainfall, more than what is required, which means it can increase the sea level, which means it can threaten your coastal livelihoods, it can threaten your oceanic and marine life. So they're all linked. So more warming is something which we can say that it is El Nino can affect or influence warming that which is already experienced. We're already saying that the temperatures are way beyond what it should be.
Right. And with global warming, is it likely for us to see more frequent or intense El Nino phases?
So it's hard to predict how the frequency of El Nino will be here on, but at least what we are noticing as a clear demarcation is that between 1900 and 1950, the first 50 years of the last century, there were 7 events of El Nino. Whereas post the 1950s till 2023, including the 2023 event, we are having 16 El Nino events. So which means from 7, it's gone to 16. So it's more than double. So given that trend, possibly we'll have to say that there could be more events of El Nino coming, given that global warming and climate change are showing up their true faces more frequently in terms of extreme weather events that we are seeing.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was hosted by me, Rahel Philipose, and written and produced by Utsa Sarmin, Shashank Bhargava, and me, Rahel Philipose. It was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.